seated. No charge either, right? Well, good afternoon. My name is Barry Anderson. I'm an Associate Justice on the Minnesota Supreme Court. I'm a Senior Justice on the court. This means I've been around a long time. I've had the privilege of not only judging this competition off and on for a number of years, I also had the privilege many years ago of serving as an assistant coach. So I've seen it from both sides and I have some appreciation for all the work you've put into it. We're really looking forward to this visit. Stephanie?
My name is Stephanie Hession. I teach in Fairfax County Public Schools, so only a 45-minute drive. I teach advanced academic civics, and I've been involved with the program for 10 years, but this is my first national finals to judge, so thanks for the opportunity.
I'm Troy Smith. I'm a professor of political science at Brigham Young University in Hawaii. My emphasis is political philosophy and federalism, where I'm a fellow at the Center for the Study of Federalism. So looking forward to hearing what you have to say today.
Could you be so kind as to introduce yourselves, your coaches and assistants?
Hello, we are Unit 1 from Grant High School in Portland, Oregon. My name is Jackson Snyder.
I'm George Crittenden.
I'm Kaden Searcy.
I'm Lon Casey.
I'm Samantha Blacker. This is our teacher, Ms. Dee Pasquale, and we are very happy to be here today.
Very good. We're here to discuss Unit 1, Question 3. Unit 1, what are the philosophical and historical foundations of the American political system? And Question 3, in the Republic, Socrates says that one of the primary characteristics of democracies is that citizens are free and there is license in it to do whatever one wants. What does Socrates mean by this? What concerns did Socrates have, if any, regarding the stability or fragility of democracy? And finally, how has the Constitution addressed the issue of license? We are looking forward to your discussion of these topics with us this morning. The floor is yours.
Plato's Republic, Book 8.
Democracy, my dear Glacon, is a society where the people have the license to live their lives as pleases them.
True, but given this freedom, Socrates, there is no compulsion to submit to authority.
This is certain, Glacon.
Then Socrates, isn't the democratic man driven by his desires with no force to guide him?
Indeed, and with all men susceptible to their desires, there is no virtue to guide the democratic state.
Thus, Plato paints democracy, and the democratic man is free, but lawless and a gateway to tyranny. Socrates' direct democracy is not representative democracy that we see today, but his word license, taken from the Greek word exousia, means each person's authority to order their life as they see fit, which is comparable to our modern understanding of liberty. Life in democratic Athens gave Socrates many concerns about democracy, but they can be distilled into 3 points. First, Socrates feared the mutability of the laws under democracy. Athens' ecclesia, the General Assembly, often flip-flopped. For example, in the Mytilene debate, the ecclesia hastily voted to execute the entire population of Mytilene, only to reverse the decision the very next day, highlighting the fickle nature of the laws, subject to a majority's whims.
Second, Socrates saw factions and demagogues as threats to democracy. Unlike Plato's philosopher kings, the democratic man is prone to pursue self-interest and follow the designs of the most persuasive speaker. Athens' hasty decision to invade Syracuse is a prime example. Alcibiades, a populist orator, preached to Athenian honor, stating that by sinking into an action, the city, like everything else, will wear itself out, and its skill in everything will decay. Enticed by Alcibiades' rhetoric, Athens' decision to invade Syracuse ultimately led to its demise.
Third, for Socrates, democracy breeds intolerance of the laws by the people. The addiction to freedom makes even the most gentle and necessary laws appear constrictive to democratic man. For Socrates, citizens end up by paying no attention to the laws in order that they may avoid having any mastery. Xenophon describes this in his work Lenica. When the ecclesia was challenged for unconstitutionally executing their genocide generals, the ecclesia retorted that it was monstrous if the people were to be prevented from doing whatever they wished.
The framers shared these fears of democracy and shaped the Constitution to restrain license. They created institutions such as the Electoral College found in Article 2. The Supremacy Clause in Article 6, Clause 2 holds state governments to a national standard for the protection of rights. The criminal justice system allows both the federal and state governments to enforce laws. The Constitution also leaves vast power to the states. Under the 10th Amendment, states retain broad police power to regulate on health, safety, and morals, to limit their citizens' freedoms, and control license on a local level.
Democracy has evolved greatly from ancient Greece until the founding, and from the founding until today. As Madison explains in Federalist 10, democracy today means a representative democracy. A government by a small number of citizens elected by the rest. It also means democracy expanded from the elitism of the late 18th century, with expanded suffrage to the 15th, 19th, and 26th Amendments. Socrates' concerns about democracy's faults remain relevant, but our Constitution now shapes a system of government that perpetuates political equality, protects against tyranny, and preserves the fundamental liberties of the people. Democracy as we know it today must be protected, and it must be preserved. Thank you. We are now ready for your questions.
Socrates was, well, let me phrase the question this way. If we look at the progressive reforms of the last century, initiative, referendum, recall, would Socrates approve of those reforms? And if so, or if not, why or why not?
I don't believe Socrates would have approved of the reforms as they bring us closer to the direct democracy he had such an issue with. When the people are given the ability to, by simple majority, pass legislation and impact the legal system, I think he would have believed that that would be subject to the mutability and the transient whims of the people that he discusses in Plato's Republic.
Additionally, Socrates lived in Athens, which was at a much smaller scale than what these states are. They had a lot less people, and these statewide initiatives and referendums would be subject to even more people and potentially even more chaos in the eyes of Socrates.
All right, so Socrates says, in a democracy, the idea of freedom becomes more important than the foundation of freedom. What does Socrates think the foundation of freedom is?
So thinking about this in terms of like the Greek idea of the macrocosm versus the microcosm, the state of a democracy is ultimately comparable to the state of an individual person's soul. So in a democracy, people are unable to differentiate between unnecessary and necessary desires, right? They believe that there is a complete platitude of value, right? And so, take it to this extreme, the idea of equality becomes such that there should be no restraint on ideas, and freedom is the highest good.
So what does he think the foundation is?
I think one of the main important ideas of a good society in Greece at the time was a society that promoted the common good. Classical Republicans would go on to interpret this during the famine period, particularly John Adams, who believed that the purpose of government was to promote the common good, and tried to do this in our Constitution. So I think that foundation of freedom is the common good of society.
I think for Socrates, the foundation of the democracy that he was describing was the complete political equality of all its members, so that there was no difference in political power between the people, which would mean that there is no one force to hold all citizens in awe.
Do you think Socrates would support the U.S. Constitution?
I think Socrates would support the U.S. Constitution more than he would support his direct democracy. Institutes things such as the Senate and the Electoral College, which are more aristocratic elements of our democracy. And this is something that he was a very big believer in. He believed in things called the philosopher kings. And that we can see this kind of idea reflected in the Senate and the Electoral College.
With respect to electoral college, we can see emphasized in Federalist 68 the idea that the electoral college was intentioned upon being an enlightened intermediary to elect a president with the discernment requisite to fill the office of the president. They didn't trust the people as to in making a popular vote in order to elect a president with the skill sets capable of actually administering the office.
Ultimately, though, I don't think Plato specifically, who was writing through Socrates, would have been particularly in favor of our government because it does have a lot of influence from the will of the people. Ultimately, our senators are elected by the people following the 15th Amendment, and so they therefore no longer represent this aristocratic element that they were intended to. Fundamentally, our government is formed on the idea that it should be the will of the people directing it, which is not something Socrates or Plato would have agreed with.
I believe my colleague meant to cite the 17th Amendment.
It's okay. So let's talk a little bit about Socratic democracy and a Lockean state of nature. Where would you be more free, in the Socratic universe or the John Locke universe?
You would certainly be more free in the John Locke universe. Socrates, or Plato writing through Socrates, describes a universe with a very intense class system, where you are designated to a role and you must fulfill that role, and there's no intermingling between the classes. whereas Locke describes a democracy. He describes a society where people's fundamental rights to life, liberty, and property are protected, and you can be free, and you can live that society intermingling with whichever class you would like.
However, Locke in the second treatise on government does really rely on two distinct definitions of government. The first is that two distinct definitions of liberty, rather. The first is that within a state of nature, you're sort of not subject to anyone else's will but your own. But he also presents an alternative definition in which liberty is ultimately having a standing rule to live by. It's to be free from sort of the inconstant stress and danger of being in a state of nature in which your life, liberty, and property are constantly subject to be taken from you. So there's really two definitions that Locke presents for liberty in the second treatise.
So let's go to liberty. Is anarchy liberty, in your opinion? Why or why not?
Anarchy is, people could argue that anarchy is liberty, but I believe it is not. As John Locke states in the second treatise, the state of nature is inherently an unsafe place for your liberties, because people are allowed to transgress upon your property and your lives at any manner that they see fit, because there is no laws. So while you might think it's the state of ultimate freedom, really you are under a constant state of stress and a threat to your freedom.
Additionally, Plato conceived of liberty as more as the authority to do what one wants, authority to make one's own decisions. And in a state of anarchy, oftentimes there isn't that authority to make your own decisions. You have other people sort of infringing on your rights and what you would want to do.
By entering into a social contract and conferring our authority upon a government, we are willingly limiting ourselves in some of our liberties in order to protect other liberties and our rights to life and property. And we see these protections in the Fifth Amendment and the 14th Amendment due process clauses.
So how are we free?
We're free in multiple ways, and one case that established the freedom to control the upbringing of your child is Myrigan, Nebraska.
Yes, ultimately, it is our government that protects our liberties through systems such as the judicial review established in Marbury v. Madison, which ensures that there is not undue restraint upon our natural rights.
I think what my colleagues are getting at is that in order to live in a world in which we are not constantly under threat of violence, we have sacrificed certain freedoms in order to live without fear.
Do you think the people would prefer safety or freedom?
Well, in the eyes of John Locke, it's safety. Safety is everything. The protection of property is why we established government, and the constant fear one has in a state of nature is exactly why we form political societies.
This was also an idea that's supported by Thomas Hobbes in his Report of Leviathan. The idea that essentially the people are not, the sovereign leader upon which the people confer all their individual wills is not actually accountable to the people in any way. Because even if the leaders commit the most atrocious crimes against those people, it is ultimately better. The security that the government affords is ultimately better than that wretched state of nature from which they escape, the one that is solid, nasty, brutish, and short, in which life is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short in terms.
However, the freedom that a democracy can impose can become addictive, like Plato talks about in his Republic. And we've seen this through a refusal of mask mandates and stay-at-home orders during the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as gun safety laws that are being overturned by cases such as New York City Rifle and Pistol Association v. Bruin.
But isn't that part of our freedom?
It
In
is-
your opinion?
Well, one of the major issues with New York City Rifle Association v. Bruin is that it was overturned.
Finish that thought, yes.
Good.
Is that it was passed by the New York State Legislature and then overturned by the Supreme Court. So essentially, it's an issue of on what level are we to be determining these freedoms, federal or state?
All right, very good. Get ready now for the next go at this, but anyway, it was.
That was fun.
That was fun. I was may say something about our social life, but we think it was a great time. We really enjoyed the opportunity to have this exchange with you, and some of these questions, they're safety or freedom. Yeah, well, you know, there's a century-long conversation about that topic, and we're not going to resolve it today, but we really understand the issues well, and you know, the question that came up about the 15th, 17th Amendment, 15th Amendment, whatever. Anyway, the change from the Senate senators being picked by the legislatures and going to direct democracy. And, you know, I think there's a pretty good argument that that needed to happen. But that was a major departure from the forms, the checks and balances that the founders had in mind, and it had consequences, and has consequences to this day. So that was a very sophisticated point that you made, regardless of whether it's the 50th or the 70th. And I really appreciated that conversation on that point. Yes, Stephanie?
I really had it, I loved asking the questions because I feel like that's the time when you can really shine, is you have those opinions. And to me, the reason I do this, volunteering, is that this gives me hope that you guys are gonna push forward and you're gonna be the leaders of tomorrow, and you're gonna be intelligent and, you know, be succinct, and just, I really enjoyed the conversation. When I pushed you, some of you had this look like, why is she asking me that? But I wanted to see, you know, how do you really feel about it? We know that you know the research and you know the book and you know all of that, but we want to know, how do you actually feel about this information that you're learning? Because sometimes that's where the real learning comes. And I love that you threw in Hobbes at the end.
So there's a saying that after Plato and Aristotle, everything else in political philosophy is a footnote. So you picked up really well. You had some very sophisticated ideas. I loved how you talked about, you pointed out that Socrates' idea of democracy is very different from representative democracy that's part of our Constitution. And how the founders were able to pull in some of the benefits of democracy, but also try to temper it. And I really appreciated that you pulled in Article 6 and the 10th Amendment and the role that the states play in helping.
He loves
provide that
federalism.
The joke is the fastest way to empty a room is to mention the words federalism. So our social life does have a bit.
Yeah.
I really wish we had more time, because I really think there's a sense of the real depth that you have in these issues, and I would like to explore them a little bit more with you. So just congratulations, and
And you have a
what
lot
great
of support.